Our ideas shouldn't be flippantly dealt with as if it's just something that pops into our head and on a whim we act on it. So I want to give you a 4-step process to help you refine your ideas. I will say though that I have done it right many times now. I would say that the greatest example would be what you see today and impact others. Today on the podcast, we are going to discuss something that I believe is one of the 8 principles that every leader should build. In my book, The Titan Doctrine, which is a book that I wrote about 5 years ago now, it comes from a place of having oversight of over 80 some CEOs. And in those days of running all the CEOs of all the companies that I was running, it allowed me to see these leadership principles that I became to believe were necessary to develop leadership. So whether you're leading yourself, leading people, these 8 principles. And I wrote the book called The Titan Doctrine, which was specific to these principles. And then what I did is, I'm such a historian, I love historical figures. I began to dissect that down and then use historical figures so that when I was teaching my executives, I could teach them historical principles and stories that it would get it etched in their mind. So it would bring in the emotional side. And so the one principle we're going to actually talk about today is the ability to refine impulses. And the historical figure, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of the figure, and then I'm going to go into the principles that I think really can help you. And so if you like storytelling, this is one of the most underrated stories, I believe, in human history. And it probably has one of the greatest effects on human history. And for some reason, our our history books really don't talk about this one. I take these historical figures and then I apply them to the principles. So today, the principle we're going to talk about is refining impulses. How do you know when to act on your beliefs, your thoughts, your creative ideas? How do you know when it's time to bring it to life? Have you as a business owner ever thought, man, this is an amazing idea. This is $1 billion idea. What do you do with it now? Do you burden all the people around you by just spitting ideas at them all the time? Because I will tell you that 90% of the people around you don't want to hear your ideas, because most people find ideas to be a burden that they can't carry. Think about this. The people that are carrying the load around you, as you're like, let's go in the workplace. The people that are carrying the load around you already have a load. And what they're carrying out is what your previous vision was. So now to add an additional vision is to add additional load. To them, all they see your idea is work. It's the output of the idea. It's not the what does this idea create and what do I benefit from? It is what is the actual workload going to take? So 90% of the people around you, in my opinion and estimation, do not actually want to hear your ideas. So how do you know what to do with your idea? I think oftentimes I get really confused as a person that really loves operations and only wants to do operations, where actually what I am, if you go back to like predictive index or any of the tools we use to really determine people's drives and who they are, I'm actually far more creative than I am an operator. But I spent so long in a corporate environment that beat you down with good ideas. They would tell you, don't bring your idea here unless you have an execution path and you've tested it in some way that does not provide liability to this organization. The bigger the organization, the less they like new creative ideas. However, you have to juxtapose that. And there is this old adage that says, if you don't innovate, you will die, right? Like if you don't evolve, you will perish, right? And so there's this idea and there's competing thoughts. So I think that it has to be process oriented so that we don't just take our ideas and spit them at people. I think that there is a process we should run it through. So for all you crazy visionaries out there that are dreaming up the next big idea and you can't wait to tell someone about it, your spouse, your kids, your employees, your neighbor, your best friend, your family, whatever it is, I'm going to give you a quick 4-step process to know when to actually take a step on that idea. And that'll be really helpful for you today to put that into practice. But before we get there, I want to talk to you about the character of a man by the name of Mehmed. And so Mehmed, and he's actually, if you go back to my Titan Doctrine, which I'm just going to give a quick little plug to that. This is chapter number 5. He is a sultan, and he's ruling in the Ottoman Empire. And he's King or Sultan Mehmed II. And This man, at the age of 12, heard a seer tell him that the Prophet Muhammad had said that at some point, one of the sultans would walk into the Roman Empire and would destroy it. And so at age 12, he began to dream about that being him. He started thinking, I'm going to be the one, because you think about the Roman Empire at this point has now conquered the known world. Their news and their fierceness and their empire has pervaded and has been pervasive in all thought globally from anyone that was in a well-traveled area. So you have the Ottoman Empire, which is kind of in the area of Persia and what would be like modern day Iran, and that general area of the world, has heard of the great conquest and feats of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire has literally defeated thousands and thousands of miles worth of land and conquered it. And now the Roman Empire has moved its headquarters into a place called Constantinople, which would be modern day Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul, Turkey spans two areas, right? Like you've got both Europe and Asia. It's the land. They have the big bridge there, and that was Constantinople. So this was the area for the leading area for the Roman Empire at the time. So Mehmed II finally comes into power. And all he can think about is conquering the Roman Empire. He thinks, I am going to be the one. I'm the one that the person said is going to walk into Roman soil and take it off of them, and I'm going to plant the flag for the Ottoman Empire. And he believed it, and he lived it. But what's fascinating about him was while he had all of these impulses, I mean, you think about this, from 12 on, he's been thinking as a young, I'm going to be the one. This is going to be me. This is the place in life. So he finally rises to power. He's given the throne. And he doesn't immediately go siege and attack Constantinople. What he actually does is he employs scientists, he employs thought leaders of the day, and he builds the world's largest cannon. And he actually creates the world's largest cannon of this day because he had heard about the thickness of the walls of Constantinople. And it's this. He gets these kind of blacksmiths together, and this group of people. And builds this crazy cannon that he thinks is going to blow a hole into the wall of Constantinople. So he spends a while building this thing, and finally he takes action on his desire to go ransack the city of Constantinople. So he goes outside of the city, sets up his cannon, and just starts blasting at the walls of Constantinople. They've got it under siege, but guess what? The walls are just way too thick. And he blasts cannonballs that are so large and so big that he didn't know the tensile strength of the steel of this cannon. So the cannon actually cracks. So now all the work that he had done, and he's not making any progress, and he actually is going at it for 55 days. For 55 days, he's got his army out there, and they're thinking they're going into the city. They're going to take over. They're going to blast a hole in the wall. They're going to all run through it. They're going to fight. And they're going to be fed, and they're going to have beds to sleep in. And they're thinking like, this is going to be our new place. We're going to go in. We're going to fight. Well, the problem is now they're 55 days out. They are killing animals to survive. They're struggling to get water. And the entire army is starting to question this young leader. And he is just, and if you've ever been there as a leader where you're like, man, I thought my idea was really going to come through, and I really thought it was going to pay off. And then all of a sudden the troops start to turn against you. They start to struggle. If you've ever been an entrepreneur, you know the feeling that I'm talking about, because your idea you just thought was going to come together so quickly. I think he thought he was going to go in, and within 3 to 4 days, they're going to be inside the city. It's going to be planting a flag. But no, he's 55 days in. People are starving. They are struggling to feed the troops. And he's got thousands, tens of thousands of troops outside the city. And so he has an idea. He gets his scientists together. And what made the Constantinople area impenetrable was that it had the Golden Horn, which was an area that you came into, which was the bay of what is now Istanbul, Turkey. But they had built a massive chain that would be hoisted across the opening of the bay. This chain was so big and so robust that it tore ships apart when they would try to come against it. So it was their kind of secret weapon that nobody could get past the Great Chain. So the walls of the city were so thick, you couldn't penetrate it with the world's biggest cannon. And no matter how much they hit it, it just didn't do much because this thing was just layers and layers and layers thick. And then on top of that, you have this chain. And so they have this massive navy that the Roman Empire has sitting inside this chain that they can't even get their cannonballs to hit the ships in there. They're stuck behind this chain. And the scientists and the historians and all that he had brought into his world began to do some research, and they realized there's actually a thin strip of land that separates the main water from the bay. And he decides that he sends out a group of people to determine if this is even possible. And he decides in one night, they come up with a plan that they're going to cut down the trees in that area. They're going to turn them into rollers, and they're going to drag their boats over the land. Never been done before. They're going to drag these ships over land with the army. And then he's going to put his ships into the bay. And when the Romans wake up in the morning, he's going to be sitting in there. So they go over there and they do all that they can to prepare. He waits for the perfect time. And in one night, they cut down the trees, and he moves in his entire navy into the bay and overland, and his entire army is now on ships sitting in front of the Roman Empires. Dawn arose in Constantinople that day. The leader, who had no idea what was about to happen, began to get pummeled with cannon fire from the ships, as this was the day that the Ottoman Empire took down the Roman Empire. And Sultan Mehmed II declared himself the leader of Rome as he walked into Constantinople as a conqueror. What's fascinating about this story is that most people have never heard, right? Like, we've heard of Augustus Caesar. We've heard of the conquest of the Roman Empire. You go back, you've heard of the conquest of Alexander the Great and the Greeks. But what you have not, very few people have heard, when I said we're going to talk about Mehmed II, most people are like, who is this guy? This guy was somebody who waited for his moment and with calculated intent changes the course of history. And for me, I think that that is how we need to couch our ideas. Our ideas shouldn't be flippantly dealt with as if it's just something that pops into our head and on a whim we act on it. Think about how disrespectful it is to the ideas that could change the world. We are by being inconsiderate and by looking at these ideas and thinking that they're so insignificant that they're not worth actually going through a process of refinement. Not only that, not are we we're disrespecting the idea, we're disrespecting ourselves, because the idea that is uniquely yours most likely will never come to pass because you're not actually putting it through a filter that gives us the greatest chance to succeed. And then you're disrespecting the third person, which is the people that it takes to make your ideas come to life. Most people, if prepped properly, if sold the vision, if given enough runway, want to succeed with you wildly, but because it's a weight that's been piled onto their shoulders after the last weight of the last idea you've been given, it's disrespectful to the idea, it's disrespectful to you, and it's disrespectful to the person who desires to actually make your idea come to life. And so what I want to do is I want to give you a process today, a 4-step process, very, very simple, to help you refine your ideas. This is something that I've been using for a while. You can always go grab the Titan Doctrine book, Amazon, or wherever books are sold, and read this in depth if you want it as a manual to maybe help you and the people around you. And that 10% of people that actually want your ideas and they've got the ideas, we can all commiserate together over the fact that we want our ideas to come to life, but there's a process to get it to come to life. So number one is we have to start by testing its origination. When you have an idea pop into your head, it's not enough to just say, is this a good idea or is this possible? I think it's important to literally ask yourself these questions. Why am I trying to accomplish it? Because oftentimes the motive for an idea is flawed. And if the motive is flawed and the emotional catalyst to getting to come to life ever has a chance to change, then the idea will never, by the way, it takes hard work, discipline, resources to get ideas to come to life. And so it's really important to make sure that you check the motive, right? The origination of it. So what am I trying to accomplish? What is it? Am I trying to innovate? Am I trying to find more revenue? Am I trying to just change the way we look at process? Or are you just bored? Are you just tired? Are you just creative by nature? Some people just get tired of the way things are done, and so they want to change things just for the sake of changing them, right? Which is a dangerous motive for its origination. Number two, does it actually hold value? Where did it come from? What am I trying to accomplish with it? Does it hold value? Is there a value that if this comes to life is of greater value than what I'm going to exchange for it? Oftentimes, because we get excited by our ideas, we often exchange the good that's being currently done for a potential that's never weighed. We often try to exchange the good that's currently being done for potential that's actually never being weighed. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Does it hold value? And is the value greater than what you're currently doing? And thirdly, did it originate from a noble place? Again, go back to motive a little bit. From a noble place. And noble, my definition, I would say, just to kind of give it context, noble would not be like nobility or kind of a regal place. Noble meaning it had good intent and is going to serve a greater purpose. There's something greater that's going to be accomplished by this. It's going to serve me. It's going to serve others. It's going to serve a community or a world around me. Does it come from a noble place? Here's why I ask that. Because I think oftentimes if the idea you have is a place of, let's just pick on the emotion of or desire of greed. If you take action from a desire that stems from greed, which I would say would be, an unknoble, or it would be something that you would not categorize as noble, then I think oftentimes what you'll find is that there will be very few people that actually want to take the ride with you unless they also have this, kind of negative place that they align with. For instance, if you came to me today and I understood that you have a great idea, and you said, Eddie, I want you to invest in my idea. And I found out that it was from a place of greed, where you're willing to take advantage of someone else in order to receive a benefit to yourself, greed, I would be out every time. And when you don't come from a noble place, oftentimes when people discover the motive, they literally walk away from the idea. And so your idea, the excitement, can draw people in. But if it doesn't come from a noble place, then oftentimes you'll lose the catalyst to bring it to life. So origination is really, really important. Number two, I believe that all of your ideas, in order to refine them properly, again, we're refining our ideas, our impulses. We're refining them by giving it what I would call solitude. Solitude for me isn't a walkabout like, Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. I don't need to go sit in the woods by myself for a week to get my ideas. Solitude oftentimes is a workout in the morning. Solitude for me is a walk on the beach for 10 minutes. I can't tell you how many times I've walked out of my house, grabbed a cup of coffee. I knew I had an idea. I had a thought. I had something that I was pondering. And just a 10-minute walk on the beach with a cup of coffee gives me so much clarity. Solitude is important. Here's why. Because oftentimes the people you surround yourself with are an echo chamber for however you've conditioned them. Did you catch what I just said? The people that often surround you when you're a leader or you're creative are an echo chamber of however you have conditioned them. You have conditioned them to do what you ask, to like what you like, to do what you say. And the problem is that oftentimes the greatest source, and I believe the first source that you should tap into, is yourself. Number one, does it have a decent origination? And then in solitude, you should consider. And what you should consider is, number one, what are you going to have to give up to get there? And I heard an old adage that I think is so fascinating. It was said that in order to get the life you want, you have to give up the one that you have. Oftentimes, in order for you to get what you want, for your impulses to come to life, come to truth, come to fruition, is you have to give up something. And you better get to a place where you're okay with giving up whatever it is. Because oftentimes, the greatest prevention from your idea, your impulse coming to life, you getting the benefit of whatever that is that you desire, is you have to let go of the thing that you previously held value to. And so solitude is important. I think solitude with your ideas and your impulses oftentimes will prevent the burnout that's created by throwing the weight of new ideas on the 90% of people that can't withstand the weight of the new idea. Number three, I believe there has to be a trial phase. The trial phase could be running it by some people, putting it in front of a group. I very much believe in beta testing my ideas. I think data should tell us how far and how deep we should go with our impulses. I have a lot of impulses. I have a lot of desires. I have a lot of things I want to build, a lot of things I want to create. By nature, I want to disrupt. I want to change the way that the world, you look at my nonprofit, Impact Others, I want to change the world, the way the world looks at nonprofits. I want to change the way the world receives capital or donations. I want to change the way that those that are less fortunate see a donation come into their hand. And a lot of that is backed by my desire to disrupt and change and make better. I want to fix things, right? So in fixing things, there must be a trial. If you're someone who is a disruptor, there has to be a trial, because in the end, if you don't actually use a trial, how do you know if there's validity into what you're saying or what you're doing? I think oftentimes the burden we give others is the burden to succeed or fail on the idea, and the burden becomes theirs. I think the burden should be ours. We should try it first. And if we can suffer the loss or the gain, then it puts us into a better place to sell the vision and take people with us, right? And so that third piece would be trial. There's a lot of ways to do that. And I think that should literally cascade all the way down into your family life and everything that you do. I think everything should have a small trial. Now, that doesn't mean you have to put something out. You have to do an MVP model, minimally viable product. You don't have to go to these deep lengths, but I do think that there should be some level of trial. Sometimes the trial is just getting a group of 4 or 5 people after you have tested the origination, you've had some solitude, build some sort of a small outline, and then put 4 or 5 people in the room, 10 people in a room, and test it with them. Try it there, right? And then lastly, number 4 is counsel. All of us need counsel. There's a biblical adage that I hold to, and it's in the book of Proverbs, and it says that there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. There's wisdom. Now, knowledge is information. Wisdom is information in action. It's in practice, right? So when the Bible says there's that there's safety, or there's the ability to create safety in the multitude of counselors, what it's saying is or there's wisdom in the multitude of counselors. What it's saying is that it's safety based on the fact that the knowledge has already been tried. This is important because it's not just their idea or their opinion. Counsel comes from someone who has already been there. Counsel is someone that has already experienced what you're trying to accomplish. And so it's important to have 2 people on the journey of life. Number 1, the person that's ahead of you. And you should always be reaching out to the person ahead of you. And the second person that's always necessary on the journey of life is the person that's on the path earlier than you, right? And I believe you should always have a hand forward, asking someone who has more experience for counsel, and you in turn should be turning back to someone else and granting counsel there, right? You are actually on your journey ahead of someone else, and they also need counsel. And so it is important to have counsel. Now, counsel isn't just your husband or your wife who just thinks all your great ideas are good and they tell you, go for it. That's amazing. Go for it. While it's great to have that type of support in your life, it's more important. It's more important to have someone who will scrutinize the idea, who will tell you about their experiences and give you the pitfalls that you're ultimately going to encounter along your way. And so as you're refining your ideas, yes, innovate or die. Do not put your ideas on the back burner, but quickly get them through a process where you can make them come to life. I will tell you that as I began to use a system like this, and you can find that out more in the book, as I've used a system like this, it's actually allowed me to bring more ideas to life than less. I think sometimes we think that the roadblocks of refinement are going to be the thing that prevents something from coming to life. And the truth of the matter is if the day or 2 or 3 that it takes you to get through this process creates a roadblock so big that it kills the idea or the impulse that you have, it most likely was a bad impulse and a bad idea, right? Like all great things can withstand a short period of testing time. And so I really, really encourage you to take kind of this thought process and put it into practice. I put these 4 words in front of me years and years ago because I was a young, impetuous leader who wanted to create a name for myself, who wanted to change the way things were done, and couldn't figure out why people would walk away and not want to work with me. They would come in excited and they would leave frustrated. And for me, this change in my life has allowed me to have lifelong friends in business who have stayed with me for 10, 15 years. I just went to a conference in Las Vegas this past weekend for an organization that I've been a part of. This organization is 15 years old. The leader of it has been with me for 10, 11 years now. She is doing a fantastic job. The staff is aligned, and I believe that the reason that organization exists and that group of people are so dialed in and they're having the success they have is because I figured this out that long ago. If not, I would have made and burdened them down with idea after idea after idea after idea, especially because they were having success. The more success you expect or that you have, the more your visionary brain turns on and the more you want to do. And so refinement is such an important thing. So let me kind of pull the full circle back. So Mehmed, as he is approaching in the middle of the night, he had a group of scouts that went out to lay the trees down, create the log rollers. He was going to haul the ships over. And these weren't small ships, by the way. It's not just little rowboats. He was taking massive ships that had cannons and sails and everything else on it over the land. And what he did first was he said, "Let's take one ship." And he started by one ship. He took down the trees and they lined the boats up. And he said, "Let's get one ship. Let's not destroy the entire Navy trying to take it over this piece of land." He said, "Let's take one ship. And when the one ship gets in the water," he said, "we'll celebrate and bring the entire army." The one ship went over land. They worked half the night. And the second half of the night, after the first ship went in the water, they celebrated. They brought the entire naval fleet over, and the rest was history. But it shows you the natural path of refining impulses. First of all, he was 12. He had the idea of standing in Constantinople, planting the Ottoman Empire flag and in front of the Roman leader at the time. But he had to wait. And then he had to wait again when he sat there outside the walls with what he thought was a brilliant idea, this cannon that couldn't penetrate the wall. And he sat there for 55 days while people were starving and starting to criticize him and getting frustrated. His leadership was turning against him. He had another idea, right? And in that idea, he still refined the impulse. He didn't just go for it. He took the idea, he tested it, he tried it, he got counsel from it. And then in the end, he ended up conquering the Roman Empire. For me, that's what your idea deserves. The respect I want you to give your idea, yourself, and those that want to make your idea come to life is the ability to refine your impulses. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you put this into practice because it will change the outcome of your life.
Do you have specific examples in your life or stories where you learned these principles, they solidified and you put them into practice?
Yes. Okay, so absolutely. I'll give you a very, very early one. I had made my first money I was in radio at the time when I was in my early 20s. And one of my advertisers gave me an idea. And the idea was a digital blow-up pillar that had writing down the pillar that I felt like I could build and go sell to car dealerships so that as cars are driving by, it would give you digital signage that are in these blow-up pillars. It was like this first original, and this is, early 2000s. Nobody had ever seen that. You couldn't even plug a laptop into something like this at this point. And so we built a mock-up. We put a ton of money into it, and I went crazy with it. And we just went all in, me and another guy. And I probably had 15 of these things sitting in my garage. Every dollar I had into it, credit cards into it, I was all in. And
this is your Canon.
This is my Canon. Yeah. And so I go to the first car dealership, and he says, he says, well, I like it. It's cool. He said, how much is it going to be? I told him how much it was going to be. He said, well, I just found these outdoor projectors that will actually project on the side of my building that cost me about, it was like, I think we were selling them for like $3,200. And he said, I can get this projector for about $300. Why do I need this blow up thing versus just a projector on my wall? I was like, that's a great question. Like maybe because it's closer to the road, it'll get more attention. And he said, yeah, we're going to test our projectors first and we'll see how that goes. So go to the next car dealership. And he said, well, how do I get power all the way out here? And I said, yeah, that's a good point too. I said, maybe just run an extension cord. He said, do you think it's a good idea to run an extension cord across the parking lot and just let cars run over it? He said, I probably have 1,000 cars in the parking lot. You think it's a good idea to just let cars run across the extension cord 1,000 times a day? And I said, well, maybe we just get like a really heavy extension cord. He's like, nah, I'm not interested. Go to the third dealership. I'm pretty beat up at this point. And he says, so here's the deal. Can you stick my logo on it? I said, no, just words. He's like, well, come back when you can stick my logo on it. I want to make sure it's branded. He said, if I had a brand, he said, and some words, then I'd probably be interested. He goes, but because you can only put words on that, he was like, I'm not really interested. So I leave. I'm 0 for 3. In the end, we went about this for 6 months. My business partner and I, we tried everything. I, was cold calling on the weekends trying to I sold two of them. It was so bad that one day, do you know the things that blow up where the guys dance? So what we did was we retrofitted them and got a fan, and then we put arms on it. And these things were 10 times the size because they were big giant tubes that inflated with air. And in the end, what we did was we turned our $3,200 into dancing guys that stood out in front of car dealerships just to get about 10 cents on the dollar for what we had invested. And it was because I was sitting there one night at dinner, somebody had an idea before, 3 days later, I was totally invested with all my life savings, everything I had, and out just trying to sell it and without ever walking through that process. If you walk back and you ask, like, origination of the idea, right? Like, well, it wasn't a bad idea. It was innovative. It was fun, but for what purpose, right? So ask, was the desire noble? No, the desire was not noble. In my mind, what I really wanted was to make enough money to buy a very certain car that I really, really wanted at the time. And I thought, if I sell enough of these, I can actually go buy the car I want, because I already had a job. So this wasn't about a job and it wasn't about investing. I just actually wanted this car. And so I had placed my sight on something that was going to give me something else that had very little value in my life. And so, the origination wasn't great. I never spent time in solitude, never thought about all the ideas. I never went to a car dealership and said, hey, if I built this thing that is 40 feet in the air, that has all these words scrolling up and down it, would that be of value? I never thought to go to a car dealership and ask them. And then in the end, I never sought counsel. As a matter of fact, a guy that I know and like and trust a lot, I told him about the idea after we'd already built the whole thing. And he said, you did what? He was like, why would you do that? And it was a guy that if I literally would have went to him and said, what would, and then he was actually the one that was like, I got an idea for you. He's like, you're not going to like it. So what's that? He said, if you put some arms on it, he said, it'd be like one of those, he said, put a cap on it and arms on it. He said, it looked like one of those guys that, blow up and float and get attention. And he goes, and now you just have a 40-foot tall one. He was the one who gave me 10, so at least his idea. But so I literally missed all the steps. And that was a very, very costly mistake for sure. I will say though, that I have done it right many, many, many times now. And, I would say that for me, the greatest example would be what you see today in Impact Others. Impact Others has 4 pillars. The 4 pillars are feeding children, right? Educating children, and then clean water, and then building sustainable businesses. I had this idea. We built the orphanages, and the orphanages were going well. And I knew I wanted to expand them, but I didn't have enough resources to just continue to expand, because it's not just about building an orphanage. It's about being able to source and resource the needed pieces for the sustainability of an orphanage. So if you put 200 kids in there, well, you got to feed those 200 kids. You have to cover all the expenses. Like, you're not ever going to find somebody who's willing to pay you, to have an orphanage. So I decided I wanted to build the very first business overseas. And the very first business I built was in India, where we had 2 orphanages. And I went back off of what I knew to be popular, what I had some skill and expertise in, which was television production studios. And then I got a ton of counsel. I spent a lot of time. I talked to a bunch of people, and we built the very first TV studio in India. And that is what funded, for probably close to 6 years, all of the things that we did with over there. We deal with a lot of people that deal with leprosy. And so parents that'll die leave their children. And so we have these leper colonies, and we have orphanages that service the leper colony. That studio, the very first studio that we built in Hyderabad, India, began the catalyst for what now is over 20 businesses that we've built overseas that is exponentially increases. But I spent a lot of time, what's the reason? Well, I wanted to exponentially increase our output and help and feed more children. Well, that's noble, right? Number 2, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, praying about it, meditating. Is this a good use of my time? Should I just build more business in the US and just give the money to them? Or does this ecosystem somehow benefit them in some way? And I spent a lot of time in thought. I spent a lot of time in trial. Our very first trial, I didn't go build. Now we have over 12 television studios around the world. We've got taxi companies. We've got water buffalo farms. We've got chicken farms. We've got sewing centers. We've got woodworking plants. We've got all kinds of stuff that we built overseas to sustain it. But it all started with that one little studio that I spent a little bit of money on as a trial to see how it went. Got a ton of counsel on what does it mean to do business overseas? Is there a legality to this? What if I have to move the money from this country to this country? Is it possible? How is the government going to look at us if we mix a nonprofit concept with a for-profit concept? And just spent a lot of time. And I will tell you, one of the greatest things, the thing that I'm most proud about, it's not the 100 plus exits. It's not all of those things. The thing I'm most proud of is not when someone comes to this office building and sees the companies we're building or sees the ones that I've built years past. It's when they go overseas and they walk into a sewing center where there's 12 women that have been rescued out of horrible situations, who have found a job that pays for their college, and their output not only covers their life, gives them purpose, but feeds 50 to 100 orphans. And that to me is so powerful. Those are the ideas that deserve to come to life. The problem is if you don't have the right refinement process, many of those ideas that could serve the world in a greater capacity ultimately fail. The greatest accomplishment of your life is not going to be the output of your life, what you've done. It's going to be the impact you have on someone else. And for me, that's what life, that's what business, that's what it's all about, is impacting others that cannot necessarily impact their own life in a positive way. And so if you'd like to learn more about Impact Others, learn how we're building these sustainable businesses around the world, please go to impactothers.com and see if there's a way that maybe we can partner together to make impact on this world. Thanks so much for being a part of the podcast and for listening today. I'd love to connect with you further, and you can connect with me on social media at Eddie Wilson Official on any of the social media channels.